The Galactic Empire had long been a shadow stretching across the stars. Its presence felt in every corner of the universe. Its iron grip silenced any opposition, and its mechanized legions were feared by even the most powerful of civilizations. Entire planets had been crushed under the weight of its authority, their resources plundered and their populations enslaved. The Empire knew no mercy, no compassion. It was a machine built for conquest, and it would never stop. For centuries, Earth had remained untouched by the Empire's reach, a small, insignificant planet lost in the vastness of the cosmos. The people of Earth had never known such a force. Their petty conflicts and struggles for power seemed trivial when compared to the horrors the Empire could unleash. The rulers of Earth, nations and governments, leaders and tyrants, were unaware that the Empire's gaze had finally fallen upon them. But in the darkness, the Ancient Ones knew. Frankenstein and Count Dracula were no strangers to the shadows of history, and the day the Empire turned its eye toward Earth would not be their first battle against an outside force. Frankenstein, the product of forbidden science, had walked the Earth for more than a century. He was a creature of raw, unyielding power, constructed from the remnants of the dead and stitched together by the hands of a man who had no regard for the laws of nature. To those who saw him, Frankenstein was a living nightmare, a force of destruction bound by the limitations of a body created by human ambition. But Frankenstein was not merely a monster. He was a protector. Though his appearance was monstrous, his heart, though flawed and tormented by his origins, had been forged in the fires of suffering and duty. He had fought to protect Earth from the ravages of those who sought to destroy it, and he had no intention of yielding to another invader. Count Dracula, on the other hand, had lived for centuries, his true origins obscured by the passage of time. His legacy was one of bloodshed, terror, and dark power, and yet he too had a purpose. He had been Earth's guardian, though in the shadows, his influence unseen. Unlike Frankenstein, whose creation had been an accident, Dracula had embraced his existence as something more than human. As a vampire, he had seen empires rise and fall, watched civilizations crumble, and understood the delicate balance of power in the world. But Dracula was no mere monster. He was a strategist, a manipulator, and a master of patience. His powers were ancient, his knowledge vast, and his resolve unshakable. When the first of the Galactic Empire's forces arrived on Earth, they found nothing of interest, at least not at first. The planet appeared primitive, insignificant, its inhabitants unaware of the galaxy-spanning war that was unfolding just beyond their reach. But the Empire was a predator that saw the potential for conquest in every world. It saw the resources Earth held, the strategic location it occupied, and the possibility of erasing humanity's influence from the universe. And so, the first strike was subtle, a reconnaissance mission designed to assess the potential threat posed by Earth and its inhabitants. The Empire's soldiers, cloaked in advanced technology, infiltrated the planet with ease, studying the Earthlings and preparing for the inevitable subjugation. But Earth had defenders the Empire had not anticipated. Frankenstein, ever vigilant, sensed the presence of the alien forces the moment they landed. The unnatural coldness of their technology, the chilling aura of their superior weaponry, betrayed their intentions. Frankenstein had fought against humanity's most dangerous enemies, but this was different. The Empire's soldiers were unlike anything he had faced before. They were not driven by mere ambition or greed. They were an unstoppable force of cold, ruthless efficiency. They moved with precision, their every action calculated to bring them closer to their goal of total domination. Frankenstein knew he could not face them alone, and so he sought the counsel of Dracula. Dracula, ever watchful from the shadows, had already sensed the Empire's presence long before Frankenstein approached him. The vampire lord had seen the rise and fall of empires throughout history, but the cold, mechanical might of the Galactic Empire was something new. Dracula knew that Earth could not survive such a force without allies. It was time to awaken the monsters that had lain dormant for so long. The two ancient beings met in the depths of a forgotten crypt, their forms shadowed by the centuries-old stone. Dracula stood tall, his eyes glowing red as he regarded Frankenstein with a calculating gaze. The vampire spoke first, his voice like velvet laced with poison. "They come for us, Frankenstein," Dracula said, his tone cold but measured. "They think Earth is ripe for the taking." "They are wrong," Frankenstein growled, his voice a low rumble. "I will defend this world with my life. But we must act swiftly. We cannot allow them to establish a foothold." Dracula nodded. "No, Earth is ours. But we cannot fight them in the open just yet. We must gather our forces. Prepare the world for what is to come." Frankenstein's eyes narrowed. "What do you propose?" Dracula's lips curled into a smile. "We strike from the shadows. We will not face them directly. We will use their own methods against them. Together, the two monsters began to prepare for the coming war. Dracula called upon his ancient followers, vampires and werewolves, creatures of legend and nightmares. He used his vast network of spies and informants to gather information about the Empire's movements, learning of their plans to subjugate Earth. Meanwhile, Frankenstein began to rally the humans, warning them of the threat they faced and preparing them for battle. The Empire would learn the hard way that Earth was not to be conquered. The Galactic Empire, meanwhile, was moving forward with their plan, unaware of the true depth of the threat they had provoked. Their soldiers had gathered evidence that Earth's greatest offenders were no more than legends, stories told to frighten children. They dismissed these warnings, assuming that the ancient monsters of Earth were no more than fantasy. They were wrong. When the first full-scale attack came, it was swift and brutal. The Galactic Empire deployed an entire battalion of soldiers to eliminate Frankenstein and Dracula. They believed they could crush the two ancient beings in one fell swoop. But what they didn't know was that they were stepping into a trap. Frankenstein, with his unmatched strength and resilience, tore through their ranks like a beast unleashed. His massive form seemed unstoppable, each blow from his monstrous hands sending soldiers flying. Dracula, moving like a shadow, struck from the darkness, his fangs sinking into the necks of Empire's soldiers before they even knew what hit them. For the first time, the Galactic Empire encountered true resistance, something they could not simply crush with their superior numbers. The creatures of Earth, led by Dracula and Frankenstein, fought back with a fury that stunned the invaders. The battle raged for hours, with the Empire's forces retreating in disarray, their soldiers too disoriented to mount a successful counterattack. The message was clear. Earth would not go down without a fight. But the Empire, driven by its lust for control, did not give up so easily. The Galactic Empire was not a force that could be defeated by mere monsters, and they quickly regrouped, determined to finish what they had started. In response, the Empire made a decision that would seal their fate. They sent a squadron of their elite soldiers to Earth with a singular mission: capture Frankenstein. The monstrous creature was a symbol of Earth's resistance, and if they could eliminate him, the rest of the planet would crumble in the face of their overwhelming power. But their plan failed. They underestimated the depth of Frankenstein's loyalty to Earth, the power of Dracula's ancient darkness, and the resilience of the people they sought to enslave. The Galactic Empire soldiers found themselves ensnared in a deadly game, a game where the prey was not the helpless humans they had expected, but the hunters themselves. And in the end, it would be the Empire that would regret their fatal decision. In the aftermath of the Galactic Empire's failed attack, the quiet in the air was deceptive. Earth was no longer a quiet planet, left to its devices in the cold void of space. It had become the center of a brewing storm, a storm that no force in the galaxy could predict. Dracula stood at the heart of it all, watching the horizon from his hidden lair, his mind already at work calculating their next moves. The Empire had made their first mistake, underestimating the monsters they believed were nothing more than myths. Now, Dracula would make them pay for it. Dracula's mind worked quickly, turning over every possibility, every strategic advantage Earth held, and the challenges that still lay ahead. He knew the Empire would regroup, recalibrate, and strike again. The Galactic Empire was a machine, but machines had flaws. Flaws Dracula knew how to exploit. He had lived through the fall of empires before. He was a master of war, patience, and manipulation. What the Empire had failed to understand was that Earth was not the same as the other worlds they had conquered. They had underestimated Earth's greatest offenders, Frankenstein and himself. And that mistake would cost them dearly. The night was Dracula's domain, the one place where his power was absolute. But tonight, his thoughts were elsewhere. He knew he needed to prepare for war, and to do that, he needed to gather his allies, both human and creature alike. Frankenstein had proven to be a formidable force on the battlefield, but Dracula could not rely on the monster alone. He needed soldiers, spies, and weapons, and he needed them quickly. His first move was to reach out to his oldest allies, the vampires who had served him through centuries of darkness. They were scattered across the world, living in the shadows, hidden from mortal eyes. They were few in number, but their strength lay in their unity and their mastery of the night. Dracula summoned them with a flick of his mind, calling them to his side. He needed their loyalty, their hunger for power, and their thirst for vengeance. The Empire had dared to invade their domain, and for that, they would all pay the price. Among his closest allies was a vampire lord named Azazel. Azazel was as old as Dracula himself, a creature of cold intellect and ruthless ambition. He had once been Dracula's second-in-command, but after centuries of power struggles and betrayals, Azazel had carved out his own empire, far from Dracula's watchful gaze. Despite their differences, Azazel had always respected Dracula's power, and now he would return to the fold. Dracula's mind reached out, sending a call to Azazel's mind. The answer came quickly, as it always did. "You have called, my lord." Azazel's voice echoed in Dracula's mind, smooth and unyielding. "What do you ask of me?" "I need your help," Dracula replied, his voice cold but filled with command. "The Galactic Empire has made a fatal mistake. They think they can crush us, but they are mistaken. I need your armies, Azazel. I need you to gather the creatures of the night. We must prepare for war." Azazel's response was immediate. "I will gather my forces, but you must know this, Dracula. War comes with a price. The Empire is not some mortal enemy we can crush in a single night. They will fight back with everything they have." Dracula's lips curled into a smile that was more a reflection of his true nature than a sign of any real amusement. "And I will show them why they should never have crossed me." With Azazel on board, Dracula turned his attention to another task: recruiting the humans who had been living under the radar for centuries, the survivors who knew how to fight, how to survive, and how to resist. Dracula had watched them for years, seen the sparks of defiance in their hearts, and he knew we could count on when the time came. The world was full of untapped potential, soldiers who had fought through the worst of humanity's own wars and lived to tell the tale. Now, Dracula would need their skills to fight the coming invasion. He reached out to his network of spies and informants, humans who had worked for him in the shadows. They were not loyal to any flag or nation, but to Dracula himself. He had helped them in their times of need, and now they would return the favor. He had long maintained connections with warlords, mercenaries, and underground resistance movements who would not hesitate to fight back against the Empire. These men and women had seen what true darkness could do, and they had no fear of the alien invaders who thought they could conquer Earth. One such individual was Gregor Thorne, a former military strategist who had gone underground after being betrayed by his own government. Thorne was known for his ruthlessness and his ability to outthink his enemies. Dracula had kept tabs on him, knowing that Thorne would be a key player in the coming conflict. The man was not easily intimidated, and his mind was a weapon in its own right. Dracula knew that with Thorne's help, they could turn the tide of the war before it even began. Dracula sent his message to Thorne, his influence seeping into the shadows, finding the man wherever he hid. The message was clear and direct. Join the fight against the Galactic Empire, or die. Thorne would not hesitate. He never did. Thorne's response came swiftly. "I'm in," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "But this war won't be won by just humans or monsters. We'll need weapons, intelligence, and a hell of a lot of firepower. I'll provide everything you need," Dracula replied. "But time is short. We must act quickly." With Thorne on board, Dracula's network of allies began to grow. His plans were taking shape, and the pieces of his army were falling into place. The vampires, the humans, the monsters, each one had a role to play. But Dracula knew that the most crucial piece of the puzzle was Frankenstein. The monster had already proven himself in battle, but Dracula knew that Frankenstein's loyalty could not be taken for granted. They were allies now, but Dracula was aware that Frankenstein was a creature of fierce independence. The creature's mind, though tormented and twisted by his own creation, was sharp and calculating. If anyone could see through Dracula's schemes, it was Frankenstein. But Dracula had no choice but to trust him for now. Dracula called for Frankenstein to join him in the depths of his crypt, where they could discuss their next move. The crypt was a place of silence, a place where the weight of centuries could be felt in every stone. As Frankenstein entered, Dracula did not rise to greet him. Instead, he remained seated, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. "You know what's coming, Frankenstein," Dracula said, his voice like a cold wind. "The Empire will come again. This time, we must not fail." Frankenstein grunted, his massive form looming in the shadows. "I'll fight, but I won't follow anyone blindly. You may be an ancient Lord Dracula, but that doesn't make you the only one with a plan." Dracula's lips curled into a faint smile. "No, you'll not follow me blindly, but you will fight with me for Earth. And together, we will show the Empire what true monsters look like." Frankenstein nodded. "I'll fight for Earth." With the foundations of his army in place, Dracula knew the next step was to prepare the battlefield itself. The Galactic Empire would come again, and this time, Earth would be ready. The war was not just about strength or numbers. It was about strategy, deception, and the element of surprise. Dracula had lived through countless wars, and he knew that to win, they would need more than brute force. They would need to outsmart the Empire at every turn. And so, the pieces moved into place. The war had begun, and Dracula, the ancient vampire, would lead the charge. The war had begun, and the first strike was a brutal reminder of what the Galactic Empire was capable of. Earth had never seen an enemy like the Empire. Relentless, calculated, and equipped with technology that no human could fathom. But Dracula had lived through countless wars, and he had never been one to back down. He would show the invaders the true meaning of resistance. The first wave of the Empire's forces arrived on Earth's surface in the dead of night. The skies were filled with massive ships that blotted out the stars, their engines humming with a cold, mechanical precision. On the ground, the Empire's shock troops, warriors genetically engineered for war, began their descent, armed with weapons that could cut through steel as easily as flesh. They were an overwhelming force, but Dracula was ready. He had prepared for this moment with meticulous care, and as the alien invaders touched down, they found Earth's defenders already waiting for them. At the heart of Dracula's forces stood Frankenstein, the towering figure of muscle and fury. The creature was a sight to behold. Its massive frame covered in scars, its eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 battles. The creature's loyalty to Dracula had never been in question, but there was something more at stake now: Earth itself. Frankenstein had fought alongside Dracula for centuries, but this war was different. It was not just about power or revenge. It was about survival. Earth was their home, and the invaders had no right to take it from them. As the first of the Empire's shock troops stormed into the war zone, Frankenstein bellowed with a primal fury, charging into battle. His fists collided with the first wave of soldiers, tearing through them like a force of nature. The invaders were taken aback by the sheer strength and ferocity of the creature. Their weapons, while advanced, were no match for Frankenstein's raw power. He crushed them beneath his fists, tearing apart their armor like paper, and sending their broken bodies flying through the air. But the Empire was relentless, and the battle was far from over. Dracula stood in the shadows, his mind sharp and calculating as he watched the battlefield unfold. He knew that brute force alone would not win this war. It would take more than just strength. It would take cunning and strategy. He had already set the stage for this conflict, and now it was time to execute his plan. From his hidden lair, Dracula sent out his orders, commanding his network of spies and operatives to strike. In the chaos of battle, they would infiltrate the Empire's ranks, sowing discord and confusion. The invaders might have technology, but they lacked the one thing that would turn the tide of battle in Dracula's favor: understanding of Earth's terrain and its creatures. Azazel's vampires, hidden in the darkness, descended upon the battlefield like ghosts. They were quick, silent, and deadly, masters of the night. Their fangs tore into the alien soldiers, and their speed made them nearly impossible to catch. The invaders, expecting a fight on open ground, were unprepared for the supernatural terror that Dracula had unleashed upon them. The vampires moved like shadows, striking from every angle, and the Empire's troops were caught off guard, their lines disintegrating under the sudden onslaught. But the Empire's forces were not so easily deterred. As the battle raged on, their commanders quickly adapted, calling in reinforcements from their ships. Massive war machines, towering behemoths of metal and energy, descended from the skies, unleashing torrents of firepower upon the battlefield. The ground shook as the machines stomped forward, their weapons cutting through anything that stood in their path. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide of battle was shifting in the Empire's favor. The invaders' technological superiority was undeniable. Their weapons were more advanced, and their machines were nearly unstoppable. But Dracula had anticipated this. He knew that brute strength would not be enough to win. Instead, he relied on the one thing the Empire could not prepare for: Earth's natural defenses. Far beneath the battlefield, deep in the Earth's core, creatures of unimaginable size and power stirred. The sandworms, ancient creatures long thought to be legends, had awakened from their slumber, drawn by the vibrations of the battle above. Dracula had set the stage for their return, knowing that these monstrous creatures would tip the scales in their favor. As the first of the war machines neared, the ground beneath them began to rumble, and the earth split open like a wound. From the depths of the planet, the sandworms emerged, their massive, segmented bodies rising up to the surface with a deafening roar. The invaders were momentarily stunned, unsure of how to react to this new threat. The sandworms were unlike anything they had encountered before, gigantic, voracious, and nearly indestructible. Their massive jaws, capable of crushing anything in their path, snapped shut on the war machines, tearing them apart with ease. The machines' advanced armor and weapons were no match for the sheer power of the sandworms. The alien forces scrambled to regroup, but they were being overwhelmed by the relentless assault from both Earth's natural creatures and Dracula's armies. Amid the chaos, Frankenstein continued his rampage, his monstrous form moving through the battlefield like a juggernaut. He fought with a fury that was unmatched, his fists smashing through the enemy ranks. But even Frankenstein's strength was not enough to face the Empire's full might. The battle was shifting once again, and Dracula knew that he needed to take a more direct approach if they were to win. In the distance, the Galactic Empire's flagship hovered above the battlefield, its immense form casting a shadow over the carnage below. Dracula knew that this was the source of their power. This was where the Empire's command structure was located, and it was the key to their victory. If he could take down the flagship, the Empire would lose their grip on the battlefield. With a flick of his hand, Dracula summoned the vampires to his side, their forms appearing from the shadows. He motioned toward the flagship, his eyes gleaming with determination. "The heart of the Empire lies there," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "We strike now. Take the fight to their doorstep." Without hesitation, the vampires surged forward, moving with inhuman speed toward the massive ship. They were met with resistance, But their speed and strength were more than a match for the Empire's defenses. Dracula followed behind them, his presence casting a dark shadow over the battlefield. As they reached the base of the flagship, Dracula unleashed his power, sending shockwaves of dark energy into the heart of the ship. The ship's defenses faltered, and the vampires quickly infiltrated the interior. Inside the flagship, the battle raged on. The Empire's commanders were scrambling to regroup, but it was too late. Dracula's vampires had already infiltrated their ranks, and the ship's systems were beginning to fail. The invaders were caught off guard, and their once formidable command structure was crumbling. Frankenstein, sensing the shift in momentum, charged toward the flagship, his massive frame crashing through the battlefield. He reached the ship just as Dracula's vampires were overwhelming the Empire's forces. With a roar, he tore into the heart of the ship, smashing through its walls and forcing his way inside. The final push had come. The Empire's reign was ending, and Earth's defenders were making their stand. The Empire had underestimated Earth, its creatures, and its warriors. Dracula had proven that the Galactic Empire could be beaten, not by strength alone, but by cunning, strategy, and an unyielding will to survive. The clash of titans had begun, and Earth's defenders were standing victorious. But Dracula knew this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and the Empire would return. But for now, Earth had won, and Dracula's grip on the planet was stronger than ever.